We're going to start.
Okay.
Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to join together in peace and harmony to work on groundwater resources, a gift from you. Amen. Okay, let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Cooper, would you lead us, please?
It would be my honor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a little announcement we must make to call this meeting to order. Please mute your devices until you are ready to speak to avoid feedback, echoing, and background noise. Make sure you unmute when speaking and remute when you are done speaking. The audio and video features of this meeting are being recorded and is being conducted in accordance with authorizations and requirements contained in Governor Newsom's Executive Order N2920, signed March 17, 2020. Callers who call in on a landline will be muted, but will be unmuted for public comment. Please be patient and give the board secretary unique hang time to unmute each of the callers. The public may comment on items covered on the agenda during item 1.3 or may do so at the time each item is considered and will be limited to 3 minutes per comment. To help with public comments, whenever possible, if any member of the public wishes to give public comment during the meeting, please let the board secretary know in advance what items you would like to speak on so that she can put you in queue. However, public comments can be made during the meeting as well. For those that did not call ahead for public comment, I will take each person's name who has public comment, and then we'll call on each person to make comment. The board secretary will time each public comment, which will appear on the screen, and will advise you when your time is up. Public comment can also be sent via email or mail to the board secretary. Comments received by noon the day of the meeting today or any time before will be posted on the website and distributed by the board to the board for consideration. Any public comments received via email or in writing after noon will be posted on to the website the next day, all of which will be part of the record. We will follow this procedure for approving items and taking public comments. I will introduce each agenda item and the presenter. At the end of each presentation, I will ask for questions from board members, calling on each board member in alphabetical order by last name. I also reserve the right to just call on board members at large to see if they want to comment. I will then call for public comments. The board discusses the item further, including public comments, if desired. Once questions and discussion have concluded, and when appropriate, I will ask for a motion and a second, and then the board secretary will call for roll call votes. Today, PowerPoint was not included in your packet. Today's PowerPoint was not included in your packet. It will be shown during this GoToMeeting and will be available on the SCV GSA website. The board secretary will be doing attendance by roll call, and each action item will be considered by taking roll call. And now I'm passing it to you, Uni, to take our our attendance roll call.
Thank you. President Atkin, are you present?
Yes, I am.
Director Bryden, are you present?
Here.
Director Cooper, are you present?
Present.
Director Gutzai, are you present?
Here.
Director Martin, are you present?
I am present.
Vice President Natoli, are you present?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's move to 1.3, public comments. Is there any public that'd like to make a comment on something that's not on the agenda? Any final call for public comments? Hearing none, we are going to move on to 1.4, approval of the agenda. You have the agenda before you, board members. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
Vice President Natoli, so moved.
Second. Martin, second.
You get that, Uni?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, go ahead and roll call for the vote, please, Uni.
President Atkin, your vote, please.
Yes.
Director Bryden, your vote.
Yes.
Director Cooper, your vote.
Yes.
Director Gutzeit, your vote.
Yes.
Director Martin, your vote.
Yes.
Vice President Otola, your vote.
Aye.
Thank you. The meeting agenda has passed.
Thank you. We move on to item 2, consent calendar. We have 2.1, approval of minutes from the October 5th, 2020 meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved, Director Cooper.
Second, Gutzeit.
Okay, Cooper, Gutzeit, you get that, Uni?
Yes, I did.
Any public comment? Any further discussion? Roll call the vote, please, Uni.
President Atkins, your vote.
Yes.
Director Bryden, your vote.
Yes.
Director Cooper, your vote.
Yes.
Director Gutzeit, your vote.
Yes.
Director Martin, your vote.
Yes.
Vice President Otola, your vote.
Aye.
Thank you. The consent calendar has passed.
All right, thank you. Moving on to item 3. Item 3.1, overview of the SCV GSA Groundwater Sustainability Plan Public Workshop held on November 4th. And this item is going to be presented by Tara Bravo with CV Strategies. Go ahead. Tara, are you there? Oh, yeah, there we go. She's on it.
I'm muted. There, I'm unmuted. Yay, and I'm sharing screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
It's still loading.
Okay.
Still
So
loading.
welcome. Is it still loading?
Yes, it's not present yet.
Okay.
I'll tell you when here, and then we can
Trying again.
run it again.
That work better?
Still loading. No
In a
wonder
minute, I'll just bypass it and start talking.
that. Why don't you? And you can get to when it comes in, then you can talk about it, and it may not come in, and you'll still have to talk about it. So you can go.
Exactly. And it's truthfully, the presentation just supports the overall discussion that was already provided in your board memorandum. So it's just presented in a slightly more attractive fashion. But basically, again, we had a fantastic turnout for our groundwater sustainability plan public workshop on water budgets. So really excited about the 47 participants that showed up. I'm just super excited about the enthusiasm of your area to really participate with this particular program. Usually groundwater sustainability plans are on the bottom of everyone's priority of list of things to do, but not so here, and it makes me really excited to continue that. Just to kind of give you an idea on the engagement and outreach portion of that, we actually reached approximately a little over 3,000 impressions on our outreach efforts, which included everything from Facebook to press releases. Unfortunately, we're still not at a place where handouts are being used, but we did have print ads, and the digital ad and the print ad on the Signal topped 100,000 impressions. So really excited about our smaller level impression and also kind of the bigger picture. And clearly that's translating into attendance. So in general, workshop feedback for this one was pretty positive. We got the 2 statements of, I enjoyed the workshop delivered very technical material in an approachable and effective manner, and then this was a great presentation. I see that it is being recorded. Will it be available on the SCV GSA website? And of course it is, and we reported that back to them. So just an idea on clearly the system that we have kind of going is working, and I can really credit the stakeholder advisory committee to helping to ensure that the information we present is provided in a layman friendly format. So there were a series of questions that were submitted, and there were a total of 14. We're handling those in the same fashion that we handled them previously, which is to develop FAQs, which we are placing on the website. So that's what's currently in process. And in addition to that, 2 feedback forms were received from the online feedback forms. The comments received on the groundwater sustainability plan itself was really focusing on providing more information as to CDFW's role and responsibilities as a trustee agency in the context of GSP development across California. So there's that one. And then also really focusing on the east side of the Santa Clara River through Santa Clarita Valley. So thinking about those pieces as we move forward. Next steps will be, of course, adding those frequently asked questions to the website, and we're in the process of doing that now. Any questions or comments? Clearly, my presentation was never going to show up, but what can I answer? Gary?
Oh, go ahead, Member Goodside.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you could email us the presentation or something. I was just curious about 2 things. What were the 14 questions? Because our write-up talks about the questions from local ecosystems and groundwater surface water connection. Do you have a summary of the questions on the water budget that we could see? And what sectors were represented by the 47 people? Did you have a variety of people, or was it, you know, heavy on, you know, business interest group or a certain particular interest group? Can you comment on that, Tara?
Absolutely. And in fact, it is just a typo that it says groundwater surface water connection. So these are actually the questions from this particular water budgets piece. So I apologize for that confusion. Those are the questions that were asked in this workshop. So it's talking about specific data sources you reference in the primary information and data sources for water budget. If you have any additional questions on that, please let me know. And then regarding the sort of the makeup of attendees, actually a lot of people wanted to remain anonymous, but we had some really great, it's a lot of really general public. It's not somebody trying to represent a specific organization, and they're very clear that I mean, one was like a 12-year-old boy. So it's really clear that this is absolutely general public. And if I'm looking at, let me pull out my notes from the meeting itself. But because of what I do is I actually, during the meeting, mark down whose staff, which board members have attended, so I know which ones you've attended. And also a breakdown on, I just have to get far enough back. So we're looking at 24 members of truly general public. And I did write down names where I saw them. So I do have a record, but there's Russ, you were there. You were not yet a board member, but still present. I have you as general public. And then there were 5 staff members, 5 consultants, 13 members of the stakeholder advisory committee, or sorry, 8 stakeholders, 8 members of the stakeholder advisory committee, and then 5 board members, which included Gina, BJ, Lynn, Mr. Cooper, and Peter. So, and clearly Russ, which I should move over. So, as you can see, a pretty healthy kind of group of people. And I was very excited.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions on the part of the board?
Yes, Mr. President, just real quickly.
Go ahead.
This is Member Natoli. Could you, I think I know, Tara, but could you explain exactly what an impression is?
Oh, absolutely. An impression is any time it's in front of eyeballs. So when you're talking about digital ads, for example, it's any time a digital ad comes up, we call that an impression versus a click through. It also includes for billboards, not that we had billboards, but in general, for example, for billboards, that would be the number of people that drive by on an average basis. For print media, that includes the number of people in circulation that this paper goes to. So while we can't guarantee that it actually is like a true impression, it's the best way we have in terms of quantifying the reach of this particular engagement effort.
And so for something like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, are those supposedly followers?
For that is the number. So we've boosted these posts, and that is the number of guaranteed eyeballs as it scrolls by.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And Mr. Martin, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, President Atkins. First of all, welcome Russ to the board. And secondly, Tara, on your next steps in your staff report, we say that all questions are to be we say that the staff will identify those which should be added to frequently asked questions on the website. All questions are to be archived for the record and will include a link to the location in the meeting when it was answered. So are we saying that all questions are or were answered?
Basically, how we're breaking it up is we're taking every single question that's asked,
Right.
and we're attaching it to an overarching frequently asked question. So that way we're not necessarily addressing, we don't have an FAQ list that's like this big, but we're making sure that we, for example, I'm just gonna give you an example. Can the specific data sources you reference in primary information and data sources for water budget slide be listed for those who want to refer to them? So what we'll do is we'll create a frequently asked question that talks about data and primary information and kind of covers that very holistically so that we're able to address more than one question in that answer. And then underneath we'll record, these are the questions that were specifically answered in the meeting, and every single question was answered in the meeting. And then you'll be able to click that and it will link to the meeting that this question was answered in. So if you want a direct answer to that specific question, we're not changing people's questions, but at the same time, we're creating a more holistic approach to the frequently asked question idea.
So are the answers to the questions already up on the website?
This one we're still working on. So this set of questions we're still working on.
Okay, thanks, Tara.
Absolutely.
Anything else from the board? Okay. Any public comment on this item? Hearing none? And that's not an action item, so we're just going to move on. It's informational, right?
That's it.
By the way, welcome. Good to see you, bud. 3.2, Rick Vergoose.
Good afternoon, directors. Nice to see you all today. I have a presentation to share. Thanks, Uni. We'll see if I have better luck than Tara did. Let's try this. Okay, can you see my screen okay, the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, terrific.
I don't want to make it actual, looks like your screen entirely, not the presentation part.
Yeah, let's see if I can.
Kind of thing you want. Yeah, there you go. That's close enough.
See if I can. Yeah, some of it's cut off. You're right. Let's just push through. I don't think it'll cut off any slides in a way that is critical. So let me jump right in. And by the way, Jeff Barry is with us today too. He's going to discuss a couple of these slides, and Jeff is with GSI Water Solutions. So let me just jump in and get going. So we wanted to check in with your board. It feels like it's been a really long time since we've had a meeting. but we've certainly been very busy on a number of fronts. And one of the big efforts that's coming forward now is developing the sustainable management criteria. And so we wanted to have an item in front of your board today to discuss it. And this is an outline of the discussion. We want to present an overview of the key components all the way through board adoption. We're going to review just some high-level concepts with the sustainable management criteria. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Stakeholder Advisory Committee's efforts in this. And then at the end of the presentation, or near the end, we'll talk about future board input and direction in it. So these are some key components here. That's better. So there are a whole bunch of key components. And of course, if we really wanted to detail this out, we'd have 100 different blocks on the screen, right? But outreach is on the bottom. And Tara did a great job explaining the outreach. Tara and Kathy have been doing terrific with facilitating the stakeholder meetings. We started outreach long ago. It will continue through development of the GSP. And as you know, we have a robust stakeholder advisory committee. Basin setting. We are really far along with this. This basin setting is where the technical reports land for the basin. And so previously, different stakeholder meetings and workshops, we've presented a number of draft technical memorandums, everything from the hydrogeologic conceptual model to potential GDEs and water budgets. Soon, in March, we're going to present yet another report to stakeholders as well on sustainable management criteria. Planning. We're in the thick of establishing the sustainable management criteria now. We're looking at data, we're using the flow model. Projects and management actions comes later. So after the criteria is developed initially, and it's an iterative process, and I'll show you a slide on that in a little bit. But ultimately, when the criteria is developed, we need to look at whether or not projects or management actions are needed to meet that criteria. So that's a future step, and there will be a future meeting on that with the stakeholders. The monitoring plan. Identification of the monitoring plan is really important because with the regulations, we have to monitor. And so we have to develop a monitoring plan that works to do that, that will satisfy DWR. And we also have to identify where we're missing data, where we have data gaps. So ultimately, these components will get rolled up in the draft groundwater sustainability plan and be submitted to your board for consideration and adoption. And following board adoption, we then move into sort of the next phase, which is annual monitoring, annual reporting to DWR, and 5-year plan reviews. Though we'll be submitting annual reports to DWR, every 5th year, DWR is supposed to take a look at the information that we've been delivering, if it hasn't been already, and get back to us about whether or not it thinks we're on track. And of course, we'll already have a good understanding of that, but part of the regulations are that DWR checks in every 5 years. Quick slide on the status. Let's see here. Here we go. Status. Outreach continues. Basin setting, like I mentioned, we're nearly done. Planning, we're well past halfway, and we're going to talk to you about sustainable management criteria today. We haven't really delved into projects and management actions yet. That's normal. That comes after we get farther along with the sustainable management criteria. Same thing with the monitoring plan. And then we move into board adoption of GSP. So a little bit about the process. Developing the criteria is a technical effort, but it's also a process, and it can be an iterative process, and there are a lot of moving parts to it. So first thing we need to do is understand the basin setting. What does it look like? How does it work? What are the critical factors in the basin? Then we'll develop goals. What do we want the basin to look like in 20 years? The sustainability goal details that out. We look at the sustainability indicators, and we'll have some slides on this, but DWR has identified 6 criteria that we need to look at with the plan, such as lowering of groundwater elevations, subsidence, depletions of interconnected surface water, etc. We have to identify undesirable results. So undesirable results are the things that make it so we have difficulty reaching sustainability. So we need to know what those are so we can eliminate them over the course of 20 years. We've got to set metrics. As I mentioned earlier, DWR requires that we monitor and report, and that includes establishing metrics and reporting on those. And then there's some iteration. Let me show you the next slide. So the criteria development has a number of steps. On the lower half of the slide, you'll see we've got basin conditions as number 1, sustainability goals as number 2, undesirable results, minimum thresholds, and 5 is measurable objectives and interim milestones. And so, the goals tell us where we want to be in 20 years. Item 3, the undesirable results are quantitative metrics that identify things which interfere with us reaching sustainability. That's number 3. And those are the things we want to avoid if we have them. 4 is the minimum thresholds. That's getting back to the metrics again. 5, the measurable objectives and interim milestones. The measurable objectives are where we want to be every 5 years and at the end of 20 years. Now, on the right is projects and management actions. And as I mentioned earlier, through developing the sustainable management criteria, we may determine that projects and management actions are needed. And so those are developed as part of the overall development of the sustainable management criteria. Some of the iteration that's shown on your screen is, are these things implementable? Are they affordable? Do they make economic sense? This next slide identifies the current focus of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. We've had a number of workshops on these concepts, and we're going to provide some examples of these to you in a minute or two. So we've had 3 workshops with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. Correction, 2. We're going to have a 3rd on Wednesday this week, talking about the criteria. So let's talk about goals. This is a suggested sustainability goal, and you see in parentheses here I have so far, because it's an iterative process. It could change, but I'll be quiet and you can just read through this for a moment. And I am, the way my computer is set up, I can't see your board right now, so I'm going to keep going. But if you're raising hands or anything, please holler, because I've got my screen filled up here, so I can't see the other video right now.
I see no motions on the part of the board that.
I have a question.
Russ has something and Maria has something. Maria, go ahead, and then Russ.
Thank you.
When you say so far, is the stakeholder group continuing to work on this and then it comes to the board, or what is the process for this is question number one.
Okay.
And number two, it needs some punctuation or splitting up in sentences, in my opinion. So a lot of words in one sentence.
Okay.
In my opinion, but I wanted to know the process too.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly double check the punctuation. You're right. There is a lot packed in there. In terms of process, we've talked about this with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee and shared it with them. They haven't told us that, so let me back up. So process, yes, we've shared it with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. We've talked about it. We will share it again with them on the 27th. The feedback from them has been somewhat neutral. We haven't heard any objections to it. So as we go down in terms of process, after the meeting on the 27th, based on feedback from the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, it's possible we might tweak this a little bit. And then ultimately what will happen, Director Gutzeit, is this will be rolled into a draft technical memorandum that's being prepared. And that draft technical memorandum will be sent back out to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee in February. And they will meet on February 24th, and we'll talk about it. And then we'll also have a public workshop on March 10th to talk about the same, to talk about this goal. So that's it from a process perspective. And ultimately, it will come back to the GSA board, and the GSA board will also have an opportunity to weigh in and tell us if it's on the right track.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we shouldn't rule out having more than one sentence in there. Just a thought.
Duly noted.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Bryden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just I guess a comment, a quick comment. I appreciate the thoughts on this. And then a question for you, Rick. Could you send out information for that stakeholder meeting on Wednesday? I'd like my staff to participate.
Sure.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
it. I appreciate.
Director Bryden, we'll send an email directly to you, or is that how you want it routed to you?
Sure, that's fine. We'll keep it simple.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, nothing further from the board on this item?
Okay.
You good, Mr. Ragutz? Are you done?
Almost. I'm going to have Jeff Berry talk about a couple of things next. So let me advance that slide. Jeff's going to cover about 4 of these slides that hit this at a high level. Go ahead, Jeff. And Jeff, just let me know when you want me to advance the slide.
Great. Okay. Hi, everybody. So these are the 6 indicators that DWR wants us to look at. And we've included some what we consider to be undesirable results or conditions or effects that we want to avoid in the basin. So the 6 being the chronic lowering of groundwater levels. We don't want to see water levels continuing to decline even during normal or wet periods. So water levels drop below what are called minimum thresholds in a specific number of wells. And I'll explain in a minute what I mean by minimum thresholds. Reduction of groundwater in storage. This is the volume in the pore spaces. We want to make sure that we have enough water in storage to get through the next drought. And so how much water is that? We don't want to basically pump our basin down and then end up in a longer drought or suddenly an extended drought and not have enough groundwater in storage. Degraded water quality. There's a range of undesirable conditions there. The GSA is not responsible for managing the water quality except in cases where there is implementation of the GSP that involves a potential impact to water quality and also with respect to pumping. But it really needs to be something that the GSP is causing in order for the GSA to have responsibility. GSA doesn't have the authority either. So basically, in this case, we're going to be looking to the regulatory agencies to manage the issues, particularly related to contamination. Land subsidence is an important consideration for folks in the basin because of the concern about damaged roads and infrastructure and property, depletion of interconnected surface water, particularly as it relates to degradation of existing habitat. That's an effect that we have to avoid, and we get into the conversation about groundwater dependent ecosystems, or GDEs. And so we'll have time to talk about that. Seawater intrusion, the sixth indicator we don't have to deal with here. I know there's been some concerns about, well, can pumping cause a reduction in groundwater quality because we're pumping water and drawing salts out of some of the bedrock units. And that is a concern, and that's addressed under the degraded water quality indicator. So moving on. So I just wanted to give you an example. How do we know if this basin is being managed sustainably? We have to establish some thresholds or some criterion. And so I'm giving you an example here of how that's evaluated. So essentially in this case, what we're talking about is chronic reduction in groundwater levels, which is an undesirable effect. You can see on the left, there's a little map, and you see those orange circles representing what are called representative monitoring sites, representative wells. And on the right-hand side, you see a water level hydrograph, and that's basically a water level change over time, time being the x-axis on the graph. In this example, you can see there's a problem here. We see a water level decline that is continuing even through wet and dry cycles. Now, there's obviously fluctuation that occurs, but it's continuing to decline. Fortunately, in our basin, we don't have that condition. Based on the science and the work that we've done, you have to go back to the other slide.
So that was an example of parts of the state, not specific.
Not in this basin, correct. I just wanted to point out one thing, and that's the what's called the minimum threshold. In this case, and for this example, the threshold was set at the lowest expected water level that would occur. And there's going to be, in this case, management actions in place to try to bring those water levels back up to some sustainable level. We don't have that condition in our basin, but I am going to go through, show you some slides from our basin.
Would you like me to continue, Jeff?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so this is just one example where we have a water level hydrograph for the alluvial aquifer. It's about a mile below the Valencia water reclamation plant. The left-hand axis is elevation in feet. I know you can't really see the numbers that well, but it's okay. And we have time on the bottom axis from 1980 to, here we go, thank you. 1980 to present. All right, so the green line on the top is ground surface. And what you'll notice here, we have several data points. We have those bright blue data points, which are actual measured water levels. And then we have the lighter blue line that you see, that squiggly line. It's responding to changes in rainfall, pumping, etc. And one of the things you'll notice is it's really constant across our time frame that we're concerned about. Now, we wanted to look at future changes. We want to look at the effects of full build out in the basin, full build out of our operating plan, pumping plan, and also looking at climate change. All right, so one of the requirements was for us to use climate change factors that DWR gave us, and then run our model, our groundwater model, to predict what might occur in the future. If we had the same hydrology that occurred in the past, projected forward in the future with climate change, what would that look like? And that's what that purple line shows that you see there, that fluctuating purple line that goes a little bit deeper because of the more pumping and because of climate change. That's why you see the line there. This is what the model predicts. Next slide. Now, we've just as an example, just to show you how this process of setting these thresholds work. So the minimum threshold, or the MT that you see here, is we set that as the threshold that we want to set so that we don't go below that. We want to set it at the lowest historical water level, or lowest measured level. In this case, the lowest predicted level that was going to occur in the year 2043. The analysis shows that setting levels at that level is not going to result in chronic decline. We felt comfortable with setting the level there, which basically means that if we start falling below that level for multiple years and in multiple wells, then we have a potentially unsustainable condition. Likewise, you see the light green line that kind of runs through the middle. That's called our measurable objective. That's essentially a target where we'd like to operate the basin in terms of water levels. We'd like to maintain water levels at about that elevation. So we picked an average through that period of predicted water levels where we want to maintain it. It's our target. So we have an operational range between the minimum threshold, the absolute lowest, and that operating range, that measurable objective level that we'd like to make sure that we reach within the 20 years, or at least we expect to be reaching now, because we don't have an unsustainable situation. Next slide.
Oh, I think that's one. That's me, Jeff.
That's you.
Okay. All right. Let me just jump in. I think we've got about 2, maybe 3 more slides to go, President Atkins. These are quick ones. So Stakeholder Advisory Committee, we've talked about it. They're engaged. Our next meeting is the 27th. Then we have one with them on the 24th, where we'll discuss with them the forthcoming draft technical report on sustainable management criteria. And then we'll have a public workshop on March 10th. And at this point, we just want to check in with your board to make sure that we're on the right track, or to determine if you have any concerns about the path we're on. Take a moment to remind everybody that the stakeholder advisory process is running well. There's a lot of information, and so if your board's able to observe those meetings, look at the content being produced, that would be helpful. And there will be additional opportunities where we're checking in with your board more on these technical reports. And in this case, the technical report on sustainable management criteria, we want to check in with your board after the March 10th workshop. And so I'm going to be quiet, President Atkins, and let your board discuss. Are we on the right track? Is this helpful, et cetera?
Okay, I've more or less abandoned the alphabetical order situation there. So I'm going to open it to board discussion beyond what we've already had. Mr. Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, President Atkins. Jeff, I hope you're still on the line, and I know Rick is, but if I go back to page 13 in the item, the staff report, I suppose it is, the preliminary draft sustainable management criteria. Under qualitative objectives for meeting sustainability goals, Roman numeral 2, avoid chronic reduction of groundwater storage, and it reads, maintain groundwater volumes and storage sufficient to sustain current and planned groundwater use in prolonged drought conditions while avoiding permanent degradation of environmental values. Now, we have just received, and we've received before, how SCV Water manages groundwater production, depending on what kind of water year we're dealing with. And that we have a diversified water supply portfolio, and you call upon various supplies depending on the conditions that are we're dealing with. So I'm curious, is that factored into your determination of this item at all? And how would you determine that, given that in a drought year, if there's less water coming from the state water project, that we'd be calling upon banked supplies and other supplemental supplies as opposed to pumping either the alluvial or the Saugus Formation aquifers? I'm just wondering if that's all factored into how this is determined, SCV Water's practice of managing groundwater production.
Great question, Director Martin. So the answer to your question is yes, it is taken into consideration. We've used the groundwater flow model developed for this basin to test the operating plan that SCV Water has in place. It's been described in the Urban Water Management Plan from 2015. It's also going to be described in the updated Urban Water Management Plan. It's called the operating plan for groundwater. Now that operating plan and the amount of pumping that goes on in any given year is somewhat driven by climatic conditions up in Northern California and the availability of state water. And so in the case where there's less state water available, our operating plan accommodates that by shifting into gear different scenarios for pumping within this basin. And in specifically relying on, say, for example, more Saugus pumping. In fact, we've tested up to 35,000 acre-feet per year of Saugus pumping and found, using the groundwater model, under a range of climate conditions, including extended drought, that we get through those drought conditions and recover water levels within a reasonable time frame. So what we've done with the model is been able to simulate those future hydrologic, climate conditions, and drought conditions to make sure that we can meet the demands and basically address the pumping requirement in the operating plan. Not sure if that answers your question, but that's the basis for setting these levels, is that we've predicted what the water levels will be in the future under essentially drought and non-drought conditions.
Thank you, Jeff. One follow-up question, though, with regard to the word chronic. Given, I believe that the new criteria for the Urban Water Management Plan is 5 consecutive dry years. Is that correct?
I would have to defer to Rick or Dirk on that one. I'm not sure what the draft is.
Yes, Director Martin, you're correct. There's a new requirement in the Urban Water Management Plan that we have to analyze a 5-year shortage.
Okay, so yeah,
that's distinct from what Jeff's referring to as chronic, which would mean over the long term, over a variety of hydrologic conditions, you would continue to see a decline in water levels.
Okay, so then that would be based on some modeling results. We're not going to wait 10 years to find out that we're chronically depleting groundwater storage.
That's correct. We're going to be monitoring the Saugus aquifer, the alluvial aquifer, and also the groundwater dependent ecosystems in the river to make sure that we don't see impacts.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Cooper.
Just to clarify, the one graph that you were showing where you had a minimum threshold, that minimum threshold, when you exceed it, doesn't mean that you're violating your groundwater sustainability plan. Is that correct? Is that your plan then has a method or a plan to bring that back up? So if you have, as Gary was saying, 3, 4, 5 years of drought, you may violate that minimum threshold, but you have the things in place to be able to bring it back out of that. Is that how the plan is going to be?
Yes, there's a response plan in the case that we fall below a minimum threshold. I will point out we're going to have a number of what we call representative wells throughout the basin in different parts of the basin and also in the Saugus and the alluvium. And so we might see, for example, we could see a decline in water levels that drop below the minimum threshold in one well. That doesn't automatically kick you into non-sustainable. All right, so it's got to occur within a certain percentage of the wells over a certain period of time in order to throw you into a response plan mode. But yes, the answer to your question is there is going to be a response. If we drop
What's
below.
that period of time that you can exceed those?
Well, right now, what's being discussed, and it has not been finalized, is a 2-year period of time. So if we see the water levels have dropped below that line for 2 years continuously in at least 20% of the wells, and again, that's subject to change, but that's what the draft says right now, then that would kick us into a response plan. There is some consideration being given to setting some kind of trigger threshold above that initiates a response prior to reaching that red line, but that's part of our process we're going through right now, establishing that and whether that's necessary.
Yeah, we should look at those criteria very closely because they could be very important in a period like this year that's going to be dry. And we also have some PFAS issues and state issues because you could exceed it quite easily for 2 or 3 years. Good, so I'm glad you're looking at that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from board members?
Looks like we have
Director
a
Atkins.
couple.
Is that Gina?
Go ahead, Director Goodsite.
I was going to let you go, but okay. I just wanted to, kind of support Director Martin and Director Cooper's comments and just say that, I think it's important that we get clarity on these definitions and the resulting actions because no doubt this will tie, if not exactly, but closely to the urban water management plan, which, can be challenged in court. And I think we just need to be clear about, at what point are we going to be concerned, but have a response, and at what point, is it a problem? Because it can be, I think, misconstrued, and Director Cooper's comments were really accurate that, we could be below that threshold, but that doesn't mean that we have a moratorium slapped in place as soon as we miss a threshold. So I think we need to be really clear with what these triggers are, how long they're in place, what happens afterwards, and just make it clear so that it doesn't result in challenges of either this or the urban water management plan. And then just, stepping back on minimum thresholds versus measurable objectives, are these completely up to the GSA to decide, or is there some state guidance coming out? For instance, and again, Director Martin talked about slide 13 in our packet. You say in there, for example, the dry period from 2006 through 2016. Has someone at the state level said a 10-year period is adequate? Has someone, or, do we have any guidance that how far we need to go back? Do we need to go back 100 years? Do we need to go look back 30 years? Is the state putting any guidelines in our objectives, and so that we know our objectives are what they would deem adequate?
Great question. So there's several pieces to that. First, there is a guidance document of best management practices for developing sustainable management criteria, and that's what we're following. And they provide some guidelines in there for how long we need to be looking, in particular with respect to forward in time. They asked us to put together a 50-year projection So we look forward actually to the year 2072 and made an estimate of what we believe the water demands to be, the land use to be, and applied some climate change factors, which, by the way, DWR provided us to see, okay, what's the effect on the basin groundwater conditions if all those things were developed over time. So the other guidance that we are following basically is that which we receive from you and the other stakeholders from the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. The DWR gives us a lot of flexibility to set the criterion based on what this basin and basin stakeholders think is appropriate. The key thing is that they are asking for is apply good science, and whatever you come up with needs to avoid undesirable results. Those are the key things. And so these thresholds that I've talked about, the minimum thresholds, basically we're saying, okay, below that we might have an undesirable result, and so we want to avoid that. So that's why we're setting that as a planning threshold. Could that change over time? Yes, actually, as we improve our monitoring program in the future over the next 20 years, and every 5-year reevaluation of the GSP, which is required, you might decide to actually adjust some of those thresholds based on what we observe in terms of climate, in terms of effects of pumping, et cetera. So it's meant to be an adaptive plan.
Okay, thank you for all that. Appreciate it.
Ms. Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two things, Mr. Berry. First, the minimum threshold, it appears to be based on a measurement taken in the latter half of 2016. And I'm wondering why that particular level was chosen. Why go with the 1 year with the lowest elevation as opposed to some sort of average between that? Why would you go for the maximum year? And if you could answer that, then I'll get to my second question.
Okay, sure. So we actually looked further back in time beyond, before 1980. We went as far back as I think 1930 with the model, looking at historical climate regimes as best we could put together. And through that record, we looked at where we thought the water levels would be. The model helps us understand what the water levels would be with respect to knowing what the precipitation was and other factors. The water level that we observed in 2016 in virtually all the wells was the lowest water level that had been recorded. And so we picked that as the lowest threshold. Now, why couldn't we pick a threshold that's higher than that? Well, we could. But that just means, there's no particular reason, because we don't have an undesirable result even when we pick the lowest. The model shows us that we get recovery. The data shows that we get recovery at the water levels, even when we drop to that level. It's possible that we could drop even lower and not have an undesirable result, but we decided to be safe with picking the level that we did. Felt that was conservative.
So really more an objective decision than a subjective decision.
I'd like to say that we were taking into consideration a range of inputs in that, both in terms of what people think and what they want to see, but also what we've seen historically out there, and also, importantly, what we predict or expect might occur in the future under, even more difficult climate conditions.
I see a bit of a problem with picking the lowest year in the highest heat year on record in the middle of a drought, but I'm sure I'd probably be overruled on that. My second question is, I thought I heard you say earlier that there's proposal to use 20% of the wells exceeding the minimum threshold as perhaps triggering management actions, but I thought I read somewhere in the materials that it would be 10% of the wells. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure where you saw that. We have been working with multiple drafts of this document and getting multiple reviews, and it's totally possible that it could have been 10% that you saw. We're looking for guidance from the stakeholder advisory committee on what that percentage should be to be reasonable.
Yeah, and forgive me for jumping in, but I think you're right, Jeff. I think in an earlier draft we had 10%, and so Director Natoli, you may have indeed seen that. Mm-hmm. But as we continue to refine it, we're refining it. The other thing that we've refined, I'm going by my memory here, but I think when we talked to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee at the first meeting in January, we may have had 10% in that one, and then I believe we revised it to reflect multiple years, as Jeff described. So.
And they don't have to be the same wells, by the way. It could be a combination of wells. It could be different wells. So any 20% combination would trigger an exceedance of that criterion.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. President.
You bet. Is there any further comment or question from the board? No, Mr. Cooper, go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff or Rick, the way our basin is operates is the east end of the basin is very shallow, and the west end of the basin is very deep, and then it goes over an area called Blue Cut that flows over into the Ventura, Fillmore Ventura area. If you have minimum thresholds that you're monitoring on the east end of the basin, it's quite often in any drought that we have, those wells always go dry in that end of the basin because of the way the basin is situated. Do you use those as minimum thresholds out there? Because we know they go dry. We have the ability to get water out to that area to serve the people, but the wells in that area just don't support it. However, when those wells do go dry, the west end of the basin is still overflowing Blue Cut and going to Ventura. It stays full all the time. How do you account for that east end of the basin then?
Rick, I can jump on that and you can cover for whatever I miss.
Sounds good, Jeff.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. That is how the basin works. It basically, during periods of excessive dryness, low rainfall, that upper end, the east end of the basin, and also in the tributaries of the basin, receive less rainfall runoff, they receive less recharge, and so the water in that, the sand and gravel of that alluvium basically starts to drain off, and so we see water levels dropping. Okay, that's just been that's what we've observed, and it's actually very consistent with what you expect in an arid basin like this. We set these thresholds not to be the same for everywhere in the basin. We actually set them based on what we observed in that particular area. So the example I gave you was for one well in one part of the basin, but we've got a different elevation for minimum threshold, and but it follows the same premise that we're using observed historical water levels or predicted water levels in the future as a basis for setting the threshold at that location, at that representative monitoring site. But it won't be the same. In fact, it might even be 100 feet different than somewhere else in the basin, as you point out, further downstream.
Yeah, that's.
Thank you.
Did you want to add something, Mr. Vergoots?
Well, President Atkins, just a little bit. I think Jeff said it well, but the thresholds for the wells will be different depending on where the wells are, and you're right. We don't want to. The eastern part of the basin behaves quite differently than the rest of the basin, and so we have the ability, and we're exercising that ability within the GSP to identify those differences appropriately.
Okay. Anything further from the board?
I want to add to that. Again, echoing Director Cooper. So, you talked about a different elevation for the east side wells, which is obvious because those are already at a different elevation, and then they do bottom out periodically. But also, would it be appropriate, or is it being considered, how long they would stay down versus how long the west side stays down? So I think you referred to the west side. Maybe if we hit the minimum threshold for 2 years, that's a concern. But on the east side, we know that we have back-to-back dry years. We also know that those wells are amongst the first to fill up when it rains. So are you applying a different time standard also on the east side, or is the 2 years kind of an overlying philosophy for our thresholds?
Yeah, for right now, we've applied the 2-year criterion, and that's a draft concept for all the wells. But I think you bring up a good point, is that there's enough variability in the basin that we might consider setting a different percentage of wells that would exceed a threshold differently depending on the response we see in the basin. I might also add, the important thing, and we're going to talk about this on Wednesday with the SAC, is not only do we have these minimum thresholds and measurable objectives for chronic water level decline and reduction in groundwater and storage, we have a very important consideration for making sure that none of those thresholds impact our river system, our groundwater dependent ecosystems, the riparian vegetation and aquatic organisms. We've actually established some criterion for those areas as well, which will probably trump everything else. So while we might be able to see water levels in the alluvium that could drop lower, we may not want to in certain locations because of concerns over impacts to the GDE. So we're sensitive to that as well as we put these thresholds together.
Okay, thank you.
Last call for the board. Public comment on this issue.
This is Sandra Cattell. May I address the board?
Yes, Sandra, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, President Atkins and directors. I have some concerns that haven't been addressed, and I think they may be related to my lack of understanding. So maybe you could clarify a few things for me. It seems the management plan focuses on SCV water, which obviously they're the primary water user, meaning they distribute to most of the residents within the watershed. But does the agency have responsibility to monitor and evaluate areas in the watershed that aren't connected to SCV water? Do they have minimum thresholds that we in the GSA should be concerned about? Maybe working with a stormwater capture, that there should be sustainability for small pumpers, primarily in the northeast areas of the watershed. So is this the purview of the GSA or not?
Is that your public comment, Sandra? Is it? Because we'll answer only after you've asked all your questions.
Yes, it's a comment and a question. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Berry or Mr. Vergoot, you choose to respond? Or do you want to take it offline?
President Atkins, I got dropped. I logged back on. I didn't hear everything that Ms. Cattell said. So, Jeff, if you're comfortable, go ahead and answer it.
Yeah, I'll cover it. So basically, this GSP is intended to pertain to all of the beneficial uses in the basin, whether that's municipal pumping, agricultural pumping, domestic water use, environmental use. So it is within the purview of the GSA to consider all of those. And in fact, all those uses are actually taken into consideration as we develop this plan. Part of our challenge, though, just stating up front, is the lack of information about private wells, domestic wells. We know of a number of the agricultural wells and have relied on information provided by 5 Point, many of those and others. But the domestic well water level information is really lacking, and it really is a data gap. So in order for us to better understand that, I think that the monitoring program that we're going to propose and some management actions are probably going to be built around identifying landowners who volunteer to have a monitoring program associated with their wells if we find that they're in a location that's necessary. But I would like to emphasize that one of the criterion that the GSA will need to think about when making a decision about wells to monitor and where to monitor is whether or not monitoring at that location and whether that location is affected by basin pumping or affected by GSP activities or planned activities. There are some locations that are up in some of these side canyons that clearly are affected by climate, clearly, rainfall driven in terms of where the water levels are. They have no connection whatsoever to the management of groundwater within the main basin. And so we'll have to look at those on a case-by-case basis to kind of make that determination, but it's a consideration for the GSA going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vergoots, you choose to add anything, or it seems sufficient to me?
Nothing to add, President Atkins.
Okay. Any other public comment on this issue?
Yeah, this is Lynn Beck. I'd like to make a public comment.
Go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
I would like to support Director Natoli's concern over the level that was chosen as the lowest level possible. When we are facing over the next several decades a potentially complete loss of snow in the Sierras, which will strain our ability to supply the projected housing, which is projected to double. And then you say that the low level is acceptable. During that drought, people lost their trees. We had no water, surface flow in the river at all. If that were to go on for 2 or 3 years, that would not be acceptable. So I would just like to put out that I think that the wrong level was chosen, and I can understand hitting that level for 1 year, but if that is a level that's consistently felt to be the baseline level, that's not right. That wasn't what groundwater sustainability plans were meant to do. They were meant to avoid those sorts of impacts. So I really urge the GSA board to look at that closely. And I'm not sure the stakeholders, it seems odd that the stakeholders would recommend this to the board. I don't think they really, I think they've just been listening to what's been told to them, not so much making recommendations. But that's a huge problem. And I hope that all of you consider it. And I support Mr. Martin's concerns as well over this, because I think over the long term, using that very low level would not be acceptable, and it would hurt both water quality, it would hurt groundwater dependent ecosystems, and it would hurt our ability to supply water to everyone in the future.
Thank you. Anything further from the public? Hearing none. That was an information item only, so we're going to move on to 3.3, discussion of SCV GSA Stakeholder Advisory Committee norms and expectations. And that'll be presented by Mr. Tom Bunn, our legal counsel. Mr. Bunn, you're on.
Thank you. Uni, is it possible for me to turn my camera on?
Could we ask Lynn Plembeck and Jeff Berry to turn theirs off, please?
Tom, you have the ability to turn it on whenever you like.
I'm clicking it and it's not turning on. Did we just get that? Well, all right, I'll have to go forward without it. Several board members asked for this item to be put on the agenda at the last meeting, which was before the election. It concerns two members of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee who both ran for the SCV Water Board of Directors and their ballot designations. One listed their ballot designation as Water Sustainability Advisor and the other one as Groundwater Sustainability Advisor, if I recall correctly. And the board members asked for an analysis of, or to discuss, they didn't actually ask for an analysis, they asked to discuss whether this violated the norms and expectations that this board had put forth for that committee. Even though the board didn't ask for an analysis, the committee itself had previously requested a legal opinion and analysis of that issue back in sometime before September. And in September, I furnished them with my opinion, which is in your board packet. I want to point out that in that opinion, I expressed no opinion whether the designation was appropriate under the Elections Code. And the main reason that I didn't was that the Elections Code itself says that it's the job of the elections official to decide whether the designation qualifies or not, and that's an authoritative determination. The norms and expectations that were established by this board, and they also established a code of conduct. The norms and expectations are in your staff report, and most of them, and the code of conduct, deal with how to behave in meetings. The only norm that seemed to me that might apply is the one that says members should never use their position to solicit for personal gain. Now, each of you no doubt has an opinion as to whether these ballot designations were appropriate, but my job was to look at what the document said. And I concluded based on that language that the norms were not violated. And my conclusion was based on two primary reasons. One is talking about personal gain. Personal gain is not typically the reason someone runs for office, even though there may be some personal gain. And I'm without evidence that the motivation was for personal gain, which there wasn't any that I know of. I don't think it could be determined that they were using their position on the committee for personal gain. The other reason was that if the intention of this board had been to say that a candidate for office could not use her experience on the committee as a qualification for the office, the norms would have said so. So that was my opinion. This was on the agenda for board discussion. There's no staff recommendation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any board, Mr. Cooper, go ahead, please.
You know, I have very great respect for Mr. Bunn, but this is one of those times when I disagree with his opinion that he put together on this issue. Ballot designations are very important when you're running for election. A lot of people look at the ballot designation of what's your occupation, and they vote based on that. And people that are running for office know that. If you're somebody that wants to be a judge and you put down there that you're a deputy district attorney, a lot of people vote for you because of that, not just because you're a lawyer. In the elections code, it has ballot designations. And under ballot designation, it says, and I'll kind of read it to you. Ballot designations are subject to restrictions imposed by the election code and accompanying regulations. In particular, volunteer service for a governmental agency qualifies as a principal vocation or occupation only if it constitutes substantial involvement of the candidate's time and effort, such as the activity or service is the sole, primary, main, or leading profession, vocational, or occupational endeavor of the candidate. Our groundwater sustainability agency meets every couple of months, and it meets for about 2 hours. Obviously, this is not a large endeavor, and it's a stakeholder advisory committee. This isn't somebody we're looking for technical professional advice. This is just a stakeholder advisory committee. The regulation also clarifies that the term principal requires a significant involvement on the part of the candidate, involvement which is only nominal, pro forma, titular, or in character does not meet the requirements of the statute. You know, as an elected official, I've dealt with the county recorder's office when you file for election, and we've had people in the past that have complained about other people's ballot designation, and the county recorder pretty much stays out of it. They say, well, we're not going to do anything about it. If you want to do something, go to court. In this case, I believe that the people that were running that used groundwater sustainability advisor as their ballot designation or their occupation far exceeded the ethics of running for office. The county recorder did nothing about it. One of them was elected and is on the board, so it's not an issue with that one. But we have one person that's still on the sustainability committee and has used that designation. If it were up to me, they have violated the norms. They used that name and that position for personal gain. Personal gain being that once they're elected, they receive a stipend for meetings, $238 per meeting. They receive medical insurance. They receive dental insurance. They receive vision insurance. So yes, if they're elected, if they run for office, I see it as they were running and using a ballot designation that is improper, that they're running for personal gain. If it were up to me, I would ask that they be removed off of the committee. However, I would like us to also take a look at, let's tighten this up. Let's make this to where each person on the committee has to agree and sign that they will not use it for personal gain, that it cannot be used as a ballot statement, it cannot be used as an occupation, so this can't happen again. I think this is this was done very unethical, in my opinion. So with that, I would move on.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Maria Goodsite, you'd like to add?
Yeah, just for people that are not familiar with the water agency, Mr. Cooper talked about the benefits. The benefits, the health insurance and medical coverage applies to the entire family of the board member. So as an estimate, you know, if you have a spouse and dependents, you're looking at in excess of $20,000 a year in coverage. And then the board meetings, because we have had two board meetings a month plus committee meetings, you're generally looking at a minimum of $1,000 a month. Board members are eligible to go to up to 10 meetings a month. So that is in excess of $2,000 a month in income on top of the very generous health coverage, just so you have a feel for the level of personal gain. That's all.
Thank you. Anything further from the board? Mr. Martin.
Thank you, President Atkins. I'd also like to weigh in on my opinion, and I'll echo Director Cooper's statement about Mr. Bunn. I do have an immense amount of respect for Mr. Bunn. However, I also disagree that the use of water sustainability advisor as a ballot designation enhances the candidate's ability to be elected. And as such, and to me, running for office is basically soliciting for your vote as a voter, and being a member of the SCV Water Board does in fact provide a personal gain, regardless of how small you think it is, regardless of whether you think it was a motivation for running for office, is in fact a personal gain. And our policy states members should never, and I emphasize the word never, use the position to solicit for personal gain. To me, it's pretty black and white that the use of that title as a ballot designation, as opposed to a candidate statement. I'm not talking about the full text of the candidate statement. I'm talking about the ballot designation. To me, qualifies as soliciting for personal gain. And to me, it's pretty black and white that it's a violation of our policy, and whatever comes of that, it comes of that. I think Mr. Bunn also mentioned using the position on the advisory committee as a qualification for being elected. They certainly could add that to the text of a candidate statement without using it as the ballot designation. The ballot designation is for a specific reason. It's supposed to indicate your occupation. And that, in fact, since this is a volunteer position, there's no compensation for that. I don't know how you could add that as a ballot designation. So I just throw that out as my opinion. Thank you.
Ms. Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to echo the comments of the directors before me, not only with our esteem for Mr. Bunn's opinions, but also what Director Cooper and Director Martin have been raising as concerns about how this was used, and my concern level raised quite a bit after Director Gutzeit gave more information on the monetary awards of the position. So I also agree that this was a very inappropriate use of the title, and I also agree that we need to tighten up these our text so that it's understood that never means never, and under what situations that applies. Thank you.
Thank you. Well stated. Mr. Bryden, do you want to add anything? Are you good?
I'm good. I agree with the sentiment of my fellow board members.
We have before us. Oh, Mr. Cooper, go ahead.
I don't know what's the pleasure of the board, but if we're going to tighten it up, I want it to be a signed statement from at least that individual, if not the. I don't know that we need to go to the rest of the board or the rest of the stakeholder committee. There were no other violations, but at least to that person, and get a statement that says this cannot be used as an occupation, profession, and have it signed so that this person cannot go back to the county again and use that as a ballot designation for occupation. And if they do, then we have the letter that we can go back to the county and say, this is improper. This person is not telling the truth. Because if we just say, let's tighten up what we say, they'll go back to the county and they'll do it again and try to use that as their occupation. So I think we need something signed that says they are not. And if they won't sign that, then my opinion is they should be removed from the committee.
I could not agree more. Mr. Bunn, with all due respect, I disagree with you wholeheartedly. I believe that there's been impropriety on the part of two stakeholder committee members, one of which resulted in her election to the SCV Water Board, and one of which she remains on the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. And to me, that was completely inappropriate and unethical and deceitful. So I will leave it at that, and I'm going to open it to public comment, and then we'll make a decision on how we move forward. So, is there any member of the public want to comment on this?
Sure.
Oh.
I would like to comment since I'm the subject of this.
And your name?
If you don't mind. Stacy Fortner. Are you?
Go ahead. You have 3
I
minutes.
have recognized. Okay. So I just want to let you know that I would have declined your health insurance respectfully. I'm already covered by my husband's health insurance, so I don't require coverage from the agency. So thank you for bringing that up and reminding me. The other thing that I want to mention is that a challenge was made to our ballot designation. We responded to the county. The county is the authoritative body in this decision, and they responded that they did not see, in fact, it says that they have, we had sufficiently explained our position and that they saw no problem with our ballot designation. I also want to say that the ballot designation was it's defined as principal, profession, vocation, or occupation, with principal being defined as substantial involvement of time and effort. It's a serious commitment that we made and continue to make, and the role is very near and dear to me. It's important to the environmental community as wildlife ecosystems, endangered plant and animal species are impacted. The role demands focus as the environmental community members are impacted the most when influential businesses and industries have greater authority, when key documents like the groundwater sustainability plan are drafted and decisions are made. Substantial involvement and significant amounts of time are necessary to fulfill the role that I was elected to perform. And I'm doing my due diligence to adequately serve in that role. I defended my use of the ballot designation because my role as an advisor on the issue of sustainability for our local water has become a principal vocation, which I invested major and substantial involvement of my time and effort so that I could fulfill the role of being an active participant and best represent the community as important decisions are made and how our groundwater will be sustained. I think that when the challenge was submitted, that they failed to mention that the packets that are distributed prior to every meeting, and we are expected to read and understand, are several hundred pages sometimes and include complicated charts and important data, which we're asked to provide comment and valuable input. And I understand also that if you look at the makeup of this board, you have 4 people who are that are water people. So we were never asked to keep a log of our time spent or preparing or learning or even formulating questions or comments. So I can't provide that data, but I can tell you that it's a substantial amount of time. I also think that if only minimal effort were given in this endeavor,
I'm sorry. Thank you for your comments.
I don't think I would be serving appropriately if I didn't
your time is up.
Submit my time.
Okay, with that, I'm going to.
President Atkins?
I have a public comment as well.
This is John Mosnada as well.
I hear Mr. Masnada, and then there's one other one. Let me hear is that a lady's voice? Who is that, please?
Yeah, it's Lynn Planbeck.
Okay, Lynn Planbeck, you have 3 minutes, and then Mr. Masnada. Go ahead.
Yes, I think when the county board has found that the ballot designation was acceptable after a challenge and review, it is odd for people to sort of rerun the election and complain about the fact that these 2 ladies used that and won. It also seems a little odd to me when consistently water district members, many of yourselves included, put water district director as their ballot designation, because and it's not your full-time job either. Many of you have other positions, but No one challenges you, of course, because everyone knows you've spent a substantial amount of time. But I would just like to say that people who care about our community do not run for the economic values they might receive from an office. They run because they care about the public. And I would hope that all of you have run for the same reason. It's not because you're getting hospitalization. Maybe Ms. Gutzeit ran because she was getting hospitalization, but I think that most people run because they have sincere concerns about the community. And there was nothing in the rules of norms of conduct that indicated that running for office would be considered some kind of monetary gain. And I think that if you want to make that clear in the future, you should make that clear. And if you're going to have Ms. Fortner sign something, you cannot single out one person. You have to have everybody on the stakeholders sign that. And I'm not even, it seems like an odd thing to do, but you know, I really would like you gentlemen and Ms. Natoli to think about this. So these women put on their ballot statement what they really cared about doing and what they were doing, spending an enormous amount of volunteer work. It was accepted by the county. It was not called out in the norms of conduct. And yet Mr. Ms. Nada, former director, general manager of Santa Clarita Water Company, of Castaic Lake Water Agency, was the one that brought all of this and possibly made the challenge at the county, and the county didn't agree with him. So now he's trying to, and you gentlemen are also trying to somehow punish these women for putting on their ballot statements what they care about and what they do and what they've spent an enormous amount of time doing. And that means they've been going to classes, they have been going out in the community and talking about these issues involving social media. I mean, they are a benefit to this stakeholder group, and Ms. Armitage will be a benefit to our board. So I just think you should reconsider being so angry about it. So I don't think it's correct.
Thank you, Ms. Pambeck. Mr. Masnada, you have
Mr. President, before we go to Mr. Masnada, this is Tom Bunn.
Okay.
I'd like to make one comment about Ms. Plambeck's statement, and that is about the directors listing having their own ballot designation say Water District Director. That is specifically allowed under the Elections Code, whether or not it is your principal occupation.
As is the word incumbent if you choose to use it, as I understand it. Correct. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Masnada, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, Director Cooper and Director Martin clearly articulated most of what I was going to say, and what Director Martin stated about it would be appropriate. It's entirely appropriate to indicate that one is serving on the committee in a candidate statement. However, I was the one that did submit a notice or an email to the county, which was never responded to. I never heard back from the county. And along the lines that Director Cooper had mentioned, it was a week before the ballot designations were to be finalized. So I could understand if the county either ignored me or did not respond to me. But I think there was clearly a violation of the code, but that's not the purview of the agency. You know, the code states profession means a field of employment. Vocation means a trade. Occupation means the employment in which. I think there was a violation there, but once again, that's not the purview of the board. With respect to norms and expectations, the term personal gain, it's been stated a number of times, personal gain in a financial sense. It's really not defined in the norms and expectations. Personal gain could be simply being elected to the board and being a director of the agency, separate and apart from the financial aspects. I think Tom Bunn, who I often agree with, may have been, I think it was a narrow interpretation. In any event, let's step back, look at it from the big picture. Was there an intent to mislead the public with those ballot designations? And anybody reading the ballot would think, oh, okay, this person is employed, makes money. I mean, the one thing the candidates wouldn't have to do, unlike our past president, is not to, they wouldn't be required to provide an income tax return because there was certainly no income from those positions. So ultimately, it's up to the board to do what it sees fit in regards to the one individual that's still in the committee. The ship has sailed with respect to the individual that was elected. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything further from the public on this? Hearing none, I'm going to go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
One last comment. Ms. Fortner makes it sound like that she does this full time. This happened last July. I think the Stakeholder Advisory Committee had only had about 2 meetings at that point. So obviously this was not their occupation or profession at that point. And I thank
Ms. Goodside and then Mr. Martin.
Just 2 quick clarifications. If you do not receive the medical insurance as a board member, and we have some board members that don't, because of equity reasons, the board members are paid in excess of $2,000 a month additional funds, whether they take the insurance. Well, if they don't take the insurance, they get the additional funds. So it is a monetary issue whether or not you actually need the insurance. Secondarily, the process for appealing these issues is unfortunately not as simple as what Mr. Mesnada did. It requires a writ of mandate to be filed by an attorney to be properly considered. So I think one of the reasons it didn't go anywhere was because there was no writ of mandate filed. I mean, that's in the statute that Mr. Cooper is probably reading from. And lastly, the comment about, what are you interested in? The ballot designation, it is very clear. I mean, for those of us that have not filled it all out, it's your profession first, or as Mr. Bond said, your elected office second. It's your vocation only if it is as principal use of your time and you're not doing anything else. You can't just say, I'm interested in healthcare, and therefore I'm a healthcare advisor and run for director of county health, for example. You have to have extensive time committed to it and not be doing any of the other 2 qualifying activities. You can't be, for instance, a environmental engineer and just say, I'm really interested in public health, so I'm going to write down that I'm a healthcare expert for my ballot. There's specific guidelines for that, and it's very complicated. I agree we're not making that decision now, but there was a cumulative snowball that happened here. And I actually think that I will abstain from the vote on this, but I do support tightening up the rules and requiring everyone on the committee to clarify that they will not use this title as their ballot designation going forward.
And now, was it Mr. Martin? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, President Atkins, thank you. A couple of points I'd like to make. It's interesting to hear all the discussion of whether it was a proper or an improper ballot designation, when in fact I think that's not relevant to our policy. Our policy simply says that members should never use the position to solicit for personal gain. I don't think we have to go any further than that. The ballot designation is used to enhance your chances of being elected, whether or not the election code thinks it, or election board thinks it's appropriate or not. And since it was used to enhance your election, and in fact there is personal gain, even Mr. Bond acknowledges there's personal gain in his write-up. He simply says that in his opinion, that's not the motivator for people running for election. There is personal gain. That's undisputable. And our policy states members should never use the position to solicit for personal gain. That's one point. And secondly, in response to Ms. Plambeck's comment, I ran in 2014 when I did have a full-time job, and I ran as a water systems manager, not as a board member. So not all of us use it when you actually have a full-time job as your primary vocation. And I think that concludes my comments, and I still think it's a violation of our norms and expectations. And when we get to discuss what we do next, I'll weigh in on it.
I agree with you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Cooper.
You know, I agree with Mr. Martin. I think he's absolutely right on people running for office. There is personal gain in that, and I don't think it can be money, it can be whatever it is that there is a gain for them doing that. In listening to Ms. Fortner's comments, she absolutely still has the thought that she can use this as a ballot designation. I don't like our groundwater sustainability agency being used to deceive the public. And with that, I would say we tighten it up. That statement has to be signed by at least Ms. Fortner. I don't care who else signs it, but if she has to sign it, if she doesn't sign it, then I think we ask for her resignation off the committee.
So then I think I can simply direct Mr. Bunn to pen a letter or to tighten this up. I can direct Mr. Bunn to provide us this same policy, but in a much tighter format so that we can then present it to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee for signature, individual signatures. Ms. Natoli, do you have a comment?
Yes, President Atkins, I believe the board would need to adopt a motion asking Mr. Bunn to revise the norms and expectations. I may be wrong on that.
Do you have an opinion, Mr. Bunn? Can you just be directed, or first let me hear from Mr. Bryden. Go ahead, sir.
I think he may actually answer my question next. I'd want to potentially have a closed session discussion on this as well, to ask some additional questions.
Okay. Mr. Bunn, can you tell us whether we can just direct you by consensus, or do we need a motion?
To actually have it happen, you don't need a motion to have me draft something, but to actually have it happen, you should have a vote. And actually, I have thought about this in advance, and I think it's maybe as simple as adding a sentence that says, members may not use their position on the committee as a basis for a ballot designation. So I'm floating that out to the board as something that I think works.
On first blush, I think it does kind of work. Mr. Cooper, do you want to add any of the board members?
Would that be signed by the committee members then?
If the board makes it part of their qualifications, yeah.
I would prefer that it be signed.
There may be some, yeah. I need to think about retroactivity for the existing committee members.
Yeah,
need
those
to
are
give that
some
a
of my
little more
concerns
thought.
that I think may need to be discussed in a private setting.
Can we do a closed session at the end of this? I don't think so.
No, it's not on the agenda, and I'm not sure what the basis for a closed session would be.
Potential litigation.
If litigation has been threatened, then, but to make policy decisions just because you might get sued based on those policy decisions, all right, is in my opinion not a proper basis for closed session.
Okay.
I'd like to see that sentence added in an appropriate location and a place for signature of all the stakeholder committee members, so that we maybe an individual statement for each committee member, or whatever form it takes. I'd like to see that sentence added, and each stakeholder committee member have to commit in writing to not using a ballot designation just because they're on the stakeholder committee. Ms. Natoli.
Mr. President, then I believe we also need to have a sentence that discusses what are the consequences if someone does.
That's fair. That's a fair point. Mr. Bunn, can you see to it that that gets done and we'll take it up at our next meeting? Or do you want to do it, or is it the pleasure of the board to do it today?
Yes.
Mr.
Yeah,
Bunn,
I can do that. Draft something for action at the next meeting.
Mr. Bryden?
Yeah, just one additional thought. I like the sentence. Might suggest the addition of if you could read the sentence again. I want to add the word soul into it, but make sure it's inserted in the correct place. Mr. Bunt, you're
Members may not use. Can you hear me?
Yes.
sir.
Members may not use their position on the committee as a basis for a ballot designation.
Yeah, the sole basis would be my suggestion, but we'll see what you come back with next week.
And sometimes it's considered ballot designation and occupation, so either one.
President Atkins, I would respectfully ask Director Bryden to reconsider inserting sole, because then that means they could put two things in the ballot designation, and one of them being the groundwater sustainability advisor, and we don't want it in there at all.
Okay, I believe that's great. He's shaking his head yes, so I think he agrees with you. Mr. Martin?
Thank you, President Atkins. If I refer back to Resolution GSA 2019-06, the last whereas in that resolution states the board may dismiss and appoint replacement committee members consistent with the guidelines. And now therefore, and under the now therefore, it talks about using, rather above that, it talks about members may never use the position for personal gain. So I think the resolution as worded gives the board the authority to dismiss and replace a committee member who violates the norms and expectations as enumerated in the resolution 2019-06.
Thank you, Director Martin. I would agree.
Is that it? Is that a motion, Mr. Martin?
Well, President Atkins, I think you already have the essence of a motion that would ask Mr. Bunn to tighten up the norms and expectations to include that a committee member shall not use the position on the committee as a ballot designation. And so if we tighten up in that regard, the language already gives the board the authority to dismiss and appoint a replacement committee members if that item is violated. So
Okay.
just trying to make it as simple as possible.
Right. So you have your directives, Mr. Bunn. Are you clear on where we go next?
Yes, I am.
Anything further on this from the board? Okay, let's move on. We'll expect that language to be tightened up, and please get it to us before the board meeting, Mr. Bunn, if you could.
Certainly.
Okay. Now we go to status of Sustainable Groundwater Management Plan, SGMA, implementation activities, and that is presented by Tara Bravo.
Right? Excuse me, Mr. President, if I may interrupt, I believe we skipped item 3.4.
We did. I'm sorry. 3.4 is discussion of SCV GSA Stakeholder Advisory Committee membership, and that is presented by Ms. Tara Bravo. I had the name right, the wrong number. Go ahead, Ms. Bravo. If you can find the off mute button. You'll get there soon. Sarah Bravo, come in, please. Sound like a pilot. Okay.
I'm trying. I was like, where is it? Where did it go?
Okay, there we go.
All right.
We're going to talk about discussion of stakeholder advisory committee membership.
Yeah, I'm just getting to that place on the agenda so I can speak to it a little bit more clearly.
Still can't hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Continue when you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we got deep into that conversation and then I was like all absorbed.
I know.
So, so basically, moving forward in terms of the stakeholder advisory committee membership, our going back to staff or going back to the stakeholder advisory committee, which I have later today. Do we have a is this really a decision? So it's tricky. So are we determined to change the committee? So we have two people that have left, which are Roger Herring and Kathy Armitage, because Roger Herring because he no longer had availability, and Kathy Armitage because she was elected to the board and is now no longer eligible. So my question, or what we're asking the board to consider, is whether or not they want to replace those positions or potentially move on without replacing those positions.
Can you share with us the relative positions that Mr. Herring and Ms. Armitage held? What were their titles?
Absolutely. It was the at-large committee member, and then also the small pumpers.
So Herring was small pumpers?
Yes, Herring was small pumpers, and and Kathy was a large pumper. Sorry, Kathy was not large. She's not a large pumper, obviously.
I would tell you, in my opinion, small pumpers must be represented on the board. They've got to have a seat at the table.
They do have Dennis Ostrom still. So they have one committee member, as does the at-large group. So we're not losing any representation at any place. So our concern is more about whether or not we want to replace to have two or move forward because we're so deep into the election process.
What's the total complement of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee presently?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What's the total complement of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee presently? How many people are on that committee?
So we're looking at, look at the roster really quick.
If we were at 12 and now we're at 11, 10.
Yeah, we're at 10.
We're at 10. Okay, so we have a choice, board. Do we replace Mr. Herring and or Ms. Armitage, or both? Mr. Martin, please weigh in.
Thank you, President Atkins. I have a couple of questions before we consider this for Tara. Do we have any other pumpers attend any of our workshops and or our meetings other than the ones that are appointed to the advisory committee?
Yes, we do. We have two large pumpers. We actually do not have medium pumpers who tend to attend. Roy Marson is very active in the discussion. And then Dennis attends every single meeting. So Dennis and Roy are fairly active in the medium and small. And then Steve Sly and Matt, I forget his last name, Matt Carpenter, are very active at the for the large pumper size.
Do you recall during the selection of committee members, as I recall, each category selected their own representatives?
That is accurate.
Do you recall that there were any other small pumpers who filed interest in application?
There
I
are
mean,
none.
interested in being a member of the committee.
There are none.
Okay. So it doesn't appear that even if we were to solicit another member of the small pumper group, that we would get much response. I know that's speculation, but.
Correct. That is 100% correct.
Okay, so, and then we look at the at-large. I think there was a larger group of at-large candidates who filed interest for the committee. Is that correct?
Yes, there were more at-large members who were interested in potentially participating. So the at-large group does have additional members, although it should be noted that one of them is also now a board member.
Okay. The last question is, if Mr. Cole is still on the meeting, I would like to get his, or even Rick, for that matter, your impression of how, if things are working with the existing committee structure, and do you think at midway through this whole process it serves any purpose to reappoint 2 new committee members who would have to be brought up to speed?
Yeah, Director Martin, this is Steve Cole. I'm Assistant General Manager with SCV Water and obviously very involved with the GSA process. Yeah, I think you articulated it, kind of the concern pretty well. I do think that the Stakeholder Advisory Committee process is working well. Obviously, we have many opportunities, not just even in the committee, but through the workshop process, through this board process, to have various members of the public engage, of which they have been. So yeah, if you were to ask me at this stage in the process, would it be a good idea to add other members that haven't seen kind of the foundation of how the document and process is being built? I would probably say we're probably better off to just continue with the committee members that we have, rather than trying to bring up to speed some additional members. So that would be my personal feeling. Obviously, whatever the board feels is appropriate is what we'll try and implement. But that would be my my personal feelings.
Thank you, Steve. And with that, my opinion is that the committee is functioning just fine as is, and I'd be very hesitant to expand the committee by 2 members simply because we have 2 members drop off midway through the process. Thank you.
Tend to agree with you, Mr. Martin. Anything further from the board on this? Ms. Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. President. While I understand we're not expanding the board if we replace the 2 people who left, expanding the committee is slated to be 12, and one of our points in making it as large as we did was to make sure that we had a diversity of opinions and diversity of experience on the committee. If we don't fill those positions, there's no harm, no foul, but I don't see a benefit in not filling the positions. Senators are appointed midterm. So there is always the potential for someone to come on board. Maybe they don't need to be completely brought up to speed. Maybe they just move forward from where they are. But I think the benefits of having more voices on the committee, if possible, should outweigh saying, fine, let's not even bother trying to find 2 people to replace those who were on the board previously. So that's my penny. Thank you.
Well, that's 1 and 1.
Good point, Sheila.
Ms. Goodside, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment for anybody that doesn't know Dennis Ostrom. I mean, I was concerned about the small pumper category, but Dennis Ostrom is a longtime City of Santa Clarita Planning Commission member, and I think he's an engineer, not sure, talks like an engineer. If the small pumpers are going to have any representative in this entire valley, they are well served with Dennis Ostrom. I'll just say that. I actually would be inclined to try to fill the seats also, but I understand the need to bring people up to speed. And I could go either way, but I am reassured by the capabilities of our small pumper participant who remains.
Any other opinions from the board? Mr. Cooper.
Yeah, I certainly understand Director Natoli's point, and Mr. Martin and Steve Cole. At this point, filling them, I'd like us to just see if we can do without them. If we need to, if we lose any more, we could certainly backfill and see what we need. But Dennis Ostrom on there for small pumpers. Dennis is part of the Planning Commission. He's a longtime community person. I'm sure he covers that quite well. So I think we're probably fine.
Ms. Bravo, want to add something?
I do, just kind of in response to what I'm hearing, and to provide a little bit more perspective. So thinking about what Stacy was saying earlier today about the hundreds of pages of papers that have already been reviewed by the current SAC, and then in addition, the short time frame that we have left, my concern about adding, not adding to the SAC, but about filling those positions would be the time frame in which we'd be able to do that. In addition, because, and if there had been a substantial number of individuals who were interested, who were not able to participate or who have been participating through the public workshop. For example, if there had been one of the at-large members who had been attending every workshop as somebody who was really excited about being part of this process, I'd possibly have a different opinion. But because nobody who was at the at-large, who was one of the people who had volunteered to be one of the at-large members, and because we have nobody else who wanted to be a small pumper, and we actually, I don't know if you remember, but we extended the deadline of people to apply so that we could get as many people to apply as possible. I don't know that it would be worth holding off any additional meetings to ensure that we had those members covered. They haven't shown up, and the people who were really interested are now board members on SCV's Waters Board, and everyone else has been very active. So I think you can understand if I'm a little bit concerned about potentially trying to seek or find those people who were not elected to be part of the at-large commission, and to try and again get small pumpers, which we had a really difficult time finding the first time. If you could kind of let that, I just wanted to kind of address that. I feel like the people who have volunteered and who've been asked to volunteer really have been part of this process, and nobody who was in the at-large original voting party has really participated in any of the public workshops or any of the SAC meetings, even though they were encouraged and invited to do so. So I hesitate to bring someone on who wasn't interested enough to actually participate as a new person on the committee. Absolutely, yes.
Go ahead, Ms. Natoli.
Then I would simply propose that, I'm not saying let's go do our complete headhunter deal here and try and find people and postpone meetings. Let's just keep going with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee as it is. Put the word out. Let's not do an entire hunt like we did the first time. Just put the word out. If we get somebody interested who wants to try and come on, great. If not, we just keep moving forward. But that we don't preclude the possibility of adding people to the committee to fill those vacant positions. Thank you.
I have no particular problem with that approach. Is any of the other board member? Okay. Mr. Martin, go ahead.
No, following up with Vice President Natoli's comments, and I agree. There's nothing to lose, of course, other than what Tara has pointed out. If we stop the action in progress, we don't want to do that. But I'm just curious, what would the process be? Would it be up to then the Stakeholder Advisory Committee itself to solicit and select, if we get any applicants at all for either of those two categories? Would they then select? Because it is different now. We're not going to get 10 members of the at-large group to pick their own representative. This would come back to the committee itself to select replacement members. Is that correct, Tara?
So because if we aren't recruiting, we would have to develop an entirely new system of selecting that individual. I think we would actually have to develop something that was more than just me ad hoc off the top of my head. I want to make sure that we are either recruiting or not recruiting. I don't know that there's like I don't know that there's a happy medium. I think that if there was somebody who approached us who was interested, I think we could very clearly say that, you know, people have resigned. But I think if there was somebody who said, I'm super interested in being a part of this, that then we would come back to the board and say, there is someone who's super interested in being part of this. How would we proceed going forward, more than just like a stakeholder? I don't know that it would live in the Stakeholder Advisory Committee group or level, and I'm not sure where it would live, because there wouldn't be the recruiting process. I think we either do the recruiting process or we leave it as is and address somebody coming forward, if somebody were to come forward at that point, and then make a determination at the board level how you would want that person to be decided to either be part of it or not, rather than trying to make decisions on the abstract.
But how hard is it to just put the word out?
Putting the word out is recruiting.
Well, I see a middle step. I see simply advertising that we have had two resignations, and we're seeking applicants. That's it. And if someone comes forward, then we evaluate them. Is it we or I say we? Is it this board, or is it the Stakeholder Advisory Committee that chooses that representative?
And I think that's directed. That's a you guys question. I couldn't determine.
Please refresh my memory. How was it done the first time?
They elected themselves, and it was individually within each section. So we recruited to get to a place where the at-large group of individuals voted for who. So there were 8 people who were in the at-large group. They then voted narrowly, like they narrowed it down to get to a place where there were 2 representatives.
Okay.
That's why it becomes difficult. It's not just a straightforward, the Stakeholder Advisory Committee decided and you didn't appoint. You wanted everyone to be able to have their own opinion on who represented them. So at this point, that's why I'm saying, for me, you either recruit or you kind of don't recruit.
Don't, you go forward.
And if somebody like comes up and goes, I heard there's a position open, then maybe we revisit and we say, but there has not been that in terms of just general interest. I'm just going to flag that.
Yeah. But has there been a notice, put out a public notice that these 2 resignations have occurred?
I don't believe there's been public notice that 2 resignations have occurred, but if we were to say that we were accepting applications, that would be a recruitment process. I mean, that's exactly what that is.
Mr. Cooper, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just we went through quite a process the first time, and there were some issues that were around that as well. My suggestion is let's put an ad out for small pumpers and for a at-large person, and let the board here pick it and put them on there. Let's not go through that process the second time again. Now,
we go forward. The Stakeholder Committee is directed to keep going, and we just connect those people as we can as we go forward.
These are replacements, so I would just let the board replace them.
Right. Sorry, Tara. Okay. All right. That's the will and pleasure. I don't think that requires a motion. Am I right, Mr. Bunn?
Yes, you're right.
3.5, this one's status of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Plan, GSP. And Mr. Vergoots, you're on for approximately 10 minutes, you said, PowerPoint presentation. Go ahead.
Thank you, President Atkins. And let's see here. I will share this now without causing me to not see the other video, I think, like last time. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, this is a quick presentation. Every quarter, we provide your board an update on the status, and there's a short written report, and this presentation follows it. And let me just get going here. So we've got a number of recent accomplishments. As usual, we've been very busy. We talked about working on the sustainable management criteria, so we won't redo that. The peer review. The peer review is underway. The groundwater model peer reviewers are working with John Porcello, who's the modeler with GSI, and that's an interesting process. I'll tell you, the expert peer review is it's both really interesting to me, but also way above my head. The kinds of things that you know the real groundwater modeling professionals are involved in is so complex. So I'm glad the peer review is going forward, and it seems like a great team. We have published a number of technical memos, which we talked about today, regarding the basin setting. Remember that graph, and I mentioned technical memos. Outreach, a lot going on. Recent water budget workshop activity, and we've had 2 discussions so far with the SAC on sustainable management criteria, and Tara is a champ at keeping our website updated, as well as Kathy. Grants, we're doing quite well on the grants. We've got up to 1.3 million available for reimbursement. We're invoicing as much as we can in terms of value every quarter. Roughly 460,000 has been reimbursed to date. So that's from the 2 grants that we applied for and received. Look ahead, data review, more tech memos being completed in June. This gets into our monitoring program that I mentioned earlier and identification of data gaps. So more work coming down the line for data review and assessment. Groundwater model update. The model is up and running. Additional refinements might be made, but if they are, we wouldn't expect anything drastic. Grant deliverable will be required for the groundwater model update, and so we'll prepare that in the next 6 months. Peer review is ongoing. Groundwater surface water interactions, we're still working with site access agreements. It's a slow process. We also have a grant deliverable under this heading, though, regarding groundwater surface water interactions. Water budget, we will prepare the grant deliverable, identifying the completion of that work. Hydrogeologic conceptual model. Nothing new in this regard since our last time, except just a reminder that we're adding a new cross-section to it, and we'll complete that documentation. Development of the sustainable management criteria. We're underway with that. We've talked about that. We plan to return to your board after the March 10th public workshop to give you an overview of the document and the feedback from the public on it. And I encourage you with this sustainable management criteria, keep your eyes peeled for the things that the Stakeholder Advisory Committee is receiving and looking at. They will see this before we formally bring it to your board. projects and management actions. We continue to work on that, and that will be one of the next steps in the GSP process. And we'll also be preparing a technical memorandum on that, engaging the stakeholder committee as well. Outreach, we completed the last workshop cycle. We're starting work on this next workshop cycle. Challenges, site access agreements, the usual with that, very slow process. Fiscal, we're within budget. Conclusions, lots of progress last quarter. We've mitigated the concern with the field work delays related to the site access agreements. But we haven't given up, so we're still working to get them executed. We're expecting this next month. More technical documents are on the way, and the stakeholder committee process will continue. And that's completes my presentation, President Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Vergoots. Good report. Any comments, questions from the board? And did you have something, Mr. Martin?
I just want to thank Rick for his presentation. I appreciate it, Rick. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I am remiss on 3.4. I've neglected to ask for any public comment on the replacements for the two board members resigning on the stakeholder committee. It's two committee meeting members. So I'm opening it for public comment. Hearing none, now we're going to open it to public comment on Mr. Vergoots' presentation on the groundwater sustainability management plan activities. The presentation we just heard, any public comment on that? Nothing further from the board? Mr. Vergoots, you're on deck again. Discussion of rotating schedule to appoint board president and vice president.
Thank you, President Atkins. No PowerPoint on this one. This is a follow-up to an earlier request from your board that it discuss rotating president and vice president. And the staff report includes a table that shows the sequencing of the last round of leadership. And what we wanted to do was just turn it over to your board for discussion. Since it was requested by your board, we're not asking that any voting takes place today on president and vice president, of course. Tomorrow, the city of Santa Clarita is expected to identify Director Keller's replacement for the GSA board, but we don't have that now. So for today, we're just opening this up for your board's discussion, whether or not you'd like to pursue a rotational process for president and vice president.
I'm going to ask Ms. Natoli to remind the board what her original. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is just one of the methods of determining leadership for a board. And when you have member agencies that rotate the president and vice president or chair and vice chair positions, everyone becomes familiar with how to run the meeting, and every member agency is involved also, and at some point I'm assuming we'll be more involved in setting the agenda. So it's just an equitable way, and it's a more transparent way to the public for managing the board. And a rotation just simply means it's automatic. And also, it doesn't mean that a person would have to be the same person representing that agency every time. There are 4 people on the board from SCV Water. The same person would not have to serve as president or vice president every time. The agency could determine who would represent the agency that time from the members who are on the board. And just having it set so we have agencies 1, 2, 3, and 4 the first year, agency 1 would be the president and agency 2 would be the vice president. Then the next year, the vice president for agency 2 would move up to be the president, and the representative from agency 3 would be the vice president. Then the following year, agency 3 would become the president and agency 4 would become the vice president. And it would just rotate like that. It's simple. There's no voting needs to be involved, and everyone gets to participate. So that's the summary of how it could work. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Open it to discussion by the board. Ms. Goodside, go ahead.
I'll say I like the concept. I found in experience sometimes people don't have the time, and this is not the same as, you know, the meeting load is not heavy on this, but we should think about if somebody wants to be on the GSA board but doesn't want to be an officer, you know, possibly for time reasons or other reasons. There might be something that messes up the automatic rotation.
Not necessarily. Then if you only had 3 member agencies who were willing to participate, then it would just rotate among the 3.
Well, and it might vary in a given year. So let's just say it's SCV Water up for president and everybody's working full time and nobody has time to chair a meeting, or, you know, they might fear they might miss 1 or 2. They might not want to have that officer position in the year that there's rotation. It might not be an issue for the infrequent board meetings, but it could.
Sure, and then you would just, the next agency that would be the vice president would move up to that. So it would just, almost like musical chairs. You just
skip the one. If somebody's like, no, our agency's not going to do it this year, you just skip them.
Sure,
okay.
Absolutely.
Mr. Cooper.
As you said, Director Natoli, there are 4 members on here from Santa Clarita Water. So that would mean somebody's got to pick which of the 4 is in the rotation. My suggestion would be, is there 7 directors, rotate 7 positions, just make it easy so we don't have to then select somebody from that one agency. The other agencies have 1 representative, which makes it easy. So I would just do 7 positions.
I don't see a problem with that. Mr. Bryden, do you want to weigh in?
Not at this time. I'd want to go back and talk to my board about their position on this.
Okay, and Mr. Martin?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Bryden. We probably should defer this until we know who the city's appointed director will be before we make a final decision. I have no problem at all of sharing the board officer positions on a rotating basis. I'm not sure that I would be in favor of a locked-in process. Well, then maybe we should consider something like the city does. It is a rotating mayor and mayor pro tem, but it takes a vote of the council to confirm that. And obviously, I think we would want a vote of the board to confirm who the new board officers are. I would like that to be considered, but I have no problem with sharing. I think we've got 7, right now 6, soon to be 7 outstanding members of the public, members of our member agencies to be board members. So I'd have no problem with sharing the board officer positions.
Okay. I think you're hearing no particular opposition, Ms. Natoli, to rotational leadership. And I think the 7 members, once we have 7 members at our next meeting, which, by the way, Ms. Kang, when is our next meeting?
I think we're trying to schedule a special meeting 1st of March.
1st of March, okay. So a little more than a month from now, when the city has their representative, we will, I think we can simply identify, I think I'll have Mr. Cole identify some sequence, and that'll just be how we present it as a point of discussion, and then the board can alter that if necessary, and we can lock it in at the March 1st meeting. How does that sound to the board?
It sounds very reasonable, Mr. President.
Okay, then we're good. We'll move on to consideration of possible, well, hang on, call for public comment on this item. Hearing none, any possible future agenda items? Mr. Cole, I'm going to ask to follow up. We can't talk about it at this meeting, but I'd like at the next meeting to follow up on Bouquet Creek and what the SCV Water Board discussion turned out to be, and basically that they have handed the ball back to the GSA, and we need to move forward on Bouquet Creek. That's my understanding. So at least, go ahead.
Be happy to give an update. Yep.
Okay, that is one future agenda item I'd like to see. Anything else on the board, from the board? Hearing none, we don't have to have a motion for adjournment, so we'll see you on March 1st, 2:30 in the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Steve and Rick and Jeff.
Thank
and
you.
all the
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.